if you compare Genesis 2:9 with Genesis 3:3, there's a little bit of a obscurity between the two trees that are in the Garden of Eden. So in Genesis 2:9, it says in the midst of the garden was the tree of life. Then later in Genesis 3:3, when the serpent is talking to Eve, Eve says, we're free to eat of any tree in the garden except for the tree in the midst of the garden. God said, we shall not eat of it. She doesn't even name it the tree of knowledge of good and evil. She just says it's in the midst. But previously, the one in the midst is the one of the tree of life. So, you know, it's possible both trees were in the midst of the garden, but she's not differentiating between the one that you're not supposed to eat from. I don't know. But I recently learned about the myth of Adapa, which is a Mesopotamian myth, kind of similar to this story, where there's like this lesser god, and he says don't eat of the food that you're offered when you're in heaven, basically. And then when he is there, he refuses to eat, but then later he learns if he would have eaten, he would have had eternal life, but he refused to eat it. So I've just been trying to like mull these things over in my mind. So that's basically what this video is, you know, there's between these two myths, it's like, you know, who do we trust, because in Genesis 3, you know, we see that God says, if you eat of this, you'll surely die. And then the serpent says, you won't surely die. Your eyes will be open. You'll be as the gods, knowing good and evil. And then what happens? It's exactly what the serpent said would happen. So God was wrong. They didn't die, and their eyes were open. They were as the gods, knowing good and evil. So I don't know how this relates to the myth of Adapa. I'm trying to figure it out. Because it's like one side says you'll die and the other one says you'll have eternal life. So it's almost as if there is really just one tree in the Garden of Eden. It's not two trees. You know, I'm thinking non-dualistically here, because that's kind of like my new belief system is non-dualism. I believe in oneness. Everything is ultimately one. So we've tried to see it as two trees. There's this like good tree that gives you eternal life, and there's this bad tree that leads to the knowledge of good and evil and makes you die and makes you ashamed that you're naked, and I think the tree of knowledge is basically the tree of non-duality, like this scene of separateness, that there's some difference between good and evil. You know, they were in a very animalistic state before they ate of the tree. They were naked and unashamed, like an animal. They didn't know good and evil, like an animal. Like animals kill each other, and there's no guilt or shame over that. It's just the way they are. So, and another question I have is, if they were allowed to eat of any of the trees, why didn't they eat from the tree of life? Why wasn't it only until afterwards that God, now they can't eat from the tree of life? They could have eaten from the tree of life. Why didn't they? And then he bars them from eating from the tree of life so that they won't live forever. Then he sends his son so they'll have eternal life. You know, John 3:16. He wants everybody to have it, everlasting life. So he sends his son, you know, so it's weird to me. I know these like myths are supposed to like help us, and I really wish I could just crack the code of the Garden of Eden, the whole idea of the evolution of consciousness, because I know that's what it's pointing to. The story of Adam and Eve is trying to point towards the evolution of consciousness, where we transformed from being mere animals into being humans, having this like higher level of awareness of self, awareness of nakedness, good and evil. I want to understand this, and I feel like this myth that was my myth given to me, you know, by my origin, my nativity, the family I was born to, where I was born and everything, you know, Christianity was given to me. So I feel like I need to understand this myth on a deeper, you know, archetypal level, the archetypes of the two trees in the garden. I need to internalize this deep ancient truth that maybe these trees were one tree. They were both one in the midst. And what transpired was somehow it was a good thing, but the duality that arose fragmented everything into a curse. And it was necessary, but it was misused. It was not the way it should have been. And we should have seen that we did eat from the tree of life too, when eating of the knowledge of good and evil, of the higher level of awareness. We also ate the tree of everlasting life, because they're really just one tree. All things are one. So our eyes were opened, but we fell into the shame and the separation of sin. That is what sin is. Sin is the belief in separation, which is just illusion. So I guess that's what I have to come to terms with, that there really was only one tree, and we do have eternal life, even though it seems like we die. There's really a mystery. Everything is mystery. The mystery of oneness. The energy that cannot be created or destroyed continues on forever and ever, despite the image of death.